So welcome to everybody that's just come on in the last minute or two. It's great to see everybody. So I've finally remembered that I needed to have headphones in order to be able to cut. There's a little clicking sound that you will notice in the recordings of the last two sessions. I forgot all about this little trick that Bill Kelly told me about. But anyway, so I think you'll find that it's a little cleaner sound tonight. And tonight we're going to finish off our biography of Ken Wilber and then move on to some of his main identifiable features of his thought. So last week we ended with a brief description of Wilber's meditation practices. And next week we shall focus on his experiences with and views of Buddhism itself. So I'm going to start screen sharing. And this is the image from one of his books, A Brief History of Everything. So while some might be tempted to think of him as a guru, Wilber consistently denies the applicability of this label. He thinks of himself as a pandit, which is a Sanskrit term meaning learned man. And I'm going to ask Wendy James, since she's here for the first time, if she could read our first reading tonight.
Can you hear us, Wendy?
Sorry, I had started but not unmuted myself. I'll start again.
Ah, great.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I am a pandit, not a guru, and with that line, which I've used 100 times in my life, the conversation with someone named Pritam moved yet again to this most difficult topic. In India, they make that important distinction. The main difference is that a guru accepts devotees, a pandit does not. Also, pandits are usually scholars of a particular tradition. In America, we call them pundits, whereas a guru may or may not be very knowledgeable about the tradition.
Thank you. So if you wouldn't mind hanging on, Wendy, I'll ask you to read the second one in a second.
Sure.
So the question is, why does a pandit refuse to take disciples or devotees? And Wendy's response is number 2.
My response is, I am an entirely different profession, as it were. For a guru or master to take on a devotee is a very serious matter, almost like a psychotherapist taking on a client. This is nothing that either party should do lightly, because it means years and even decades of the most personal, intimate, and intense work between them. Gurus have to wrestle, often in public, with the karma or conditioning of all those who come to them. This is a very severe and demanding task.
Great, thank you. So what then does a pandit do in Wilber's point of view? I guess I'm just going to go through the alphabetical order, and that means that Lisa is next in line for number 3.
A particular pandit may be more or less enlightened than a particular guru, but in any event, pandits usually confine their understanding to writing or teaching at, say, a university or in other fairly common pursuits, but they do not usually engage in spiritual therapy with people. That's an entirely different ballgame.
Absolutely. So here's another shot of Wilber the thinker. As a pandit, then, Wilber has students who either attend small seminars he gives or who read his numerous books. He does not have, nor will he have, any disciples or devotees. Seminars allow him to reach as many as 100 people at a time. With a book, however, he may reach as many as 100,000 people. That's why he concentrates his efforts on writing. He makes no apologies for his theoretical emphasis. As he says, he is leading with his strongest suit. Okay, so Bill Kelly, could you read number 4 for us, please? And 5 without a break.
When people say to me, aren't you leaving out feelings and the personal dimension in your work? Or don't you use writing to avoid your personal problems? My response is, maybe I do and maybe I don't. The fact is that I have these ideas, and for me, tying them together is what seems most important. The main work I do in the world is writing. I average 6 to 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. On intense writing days, I go up to 15 to 18 hours. My 2 main practices are meditating and writing. They are very solitary, and what I do is very cognitive. My strong point is my mind, no question. That's the talent I was given. If I could sing or sculpt my ideas, maybe I'd do that. I just happen to believe that the main component of human growth and development is through consciousness, and that the main way to get these ideas across is through my writing.
Very clear. Thank you very much. So, one of his central concepts is that individuals transcend and include earlier stages of development as they mature. Only after they successfully negotiate a given stage is it possible for them to fully inhabit the next stage. Okay, how about Joey for number 6?
Just as sitting precedes standing in physical development, and letters are always learned before words in intellectual development, so the stages of consciousness unfold in sequential fashion. You can't bypass any of them until you work out unresolved issues lodged in the unconscious. They stand in the way of higher development. If you have large repressed material from lower stages, it will eat up your attention and energy. The more consciousness that is trapped in these lower stages, say in some unresolved issue with your mother at the age of 4, the less consciousness you have available to find a home in the stages beyond ego.
Okay, thank you. So Wilber is careful to say that development takes place far less smoothly, predictably, and sequentially than the charts he has created would suggest. Needs fail to be met in the lower stages. Repression occurs. Blockages build up. But unless these disruptions are severe, people still tend to move up the ladder of development. All you need is a passing grade to get to the next stage. Development can be something of a two-edged sword, though. I don't know. I don't remember seeing Danielle there. Linda, is she here tonight?
I just arrived.
Oh, great.
I was really so busy. I haven't even eaten. So I'm eating right now, but I can read.
Okay, that'll be great. Thank you so much. Number 7 is where we're at.
Okay. New capacities that emerge at any given stage may be used not only to broaden consciousness, but also to avoid issues left unresolved at a lower stage. The emergence of logical and rational powers are a potential tool of greater wisdom and depth, for example, but also a means by which to rationalize, intellectualize, and distance oneself from painful feelings and impulses that persist in earlier stages. Schwartz, what really matters.
Okay, thank you. Now you can go back to eating. So All right. So rather than transcending and including the capacity of the previous stage, as Wilber characterizes ideal development, people often transcend and exclude or repress the conflicts they leave behind. Okay, Jack, I wonder if you could read 8 and 9 with a little break in between.
Okay. A lot of people seek out meditation, pardon me, as a way of spiritually bypassing. Did you say 8? Start with 8?
Yep, you're doing fine.
By passing the lower stages, but it simply doesn't work. I'm going to start over. A lot of people seek out meditation as a way of spiritually bypassing the lower stages, but it simply doesn't work. The issues persist, and they eventually find ways of expressing themselves. Tony
So-
Schwartz, What Really Matters, page 3.
Okay, and so in Wilber's view, the formation of a healthy ego is an important and necessary step on the road to higher stages of development. And that's number 9, Jack.
Okay. The ego is basically an acorn for one's spiritual self. It's a perfect stage in a larger process, fine as far as it goes, as optimal as you can get an ego to be. If you destroy the acorn or the ego, you destroy the possibility for an oak or a higher self.
Mhm.
Well, I guess that depends on the definition you give to the word ego, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, I don't want to get too technical about that at this point, but what you typically think of as the ego is what he's referring to here.
Mark, Wendy has her hand
I
up.
see that. Wendy, what would you like to ask?
Oh.
Can you unmute Wendy?
Sorry. Yes, I just wanted to say, and I hope this isn't too far off, but clearly this principle that Wilber's talking about here exists in the case of the evolution, or at least the spiritual evolution of mankind, because in the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, the letter Shoghi Effendi from 1934, he quotes, and we learned today that we don't know where the quote comes from, but he's talking about divinely revealed religions. As a close observer, we don't know who that was, has graphically expressed it. And then here's in quotes, are doomed not to die, but to be reborn. And he says, does not the child succumb in the youth, and the youth in the man, yet neither child nor youth perishes.
Mhm.
So it's the same principle, but it's in the case, Baha'u'llah is using it in the case of the progression of religions, because we progress, and we progress in the same way, that some of what we were is in this more evolved civilization.
Mhm.
And in the case of mankind, it's because of the manifestations of God. And that's on page 114 in the book, the World Order of Baha'u'llah, but it's from the letter, the Dispensation of Baha'u'llah. It's just a coincidence that we read that this morning.
That's very pertinent. That's very much the point of view we're working towards as we go through this multi-part course. That we're not here to jettison any previous religion. We're here to help it to evolve even more fully than it has to this date. Yeah,
Right.
so it's a unity and diversity. So we're not talking about everything becoming beige.
Right.
Anything further on that, Wendy, or?
Well, just that if you go to those pages right around 114, 115, he gets right into that and says, Shoghi Effendi does, he talks about how the the base of these religions will broaden. And I thought of myself coming from a Jewish background and skipping right over to the Bab and Baha'u'llah through acceptance of Christ and acceptance of Muhammad. And even the Bab talked about that if you don't accept me, but you accept him whom God shall make manifest, you'll be even more beloved in my sight. And so that's a way of looking maybe at the broadened base, but that's all in those pages. And it's just a coincidence we talked about that this morning.
Mhm. Okay. So in Wilber's model, the path to wisdom is built around broadening one's boundaries progressively, thereby enlarging one's sense of self. In Sufism and the Baha'i faith, we come across the idea of dying to the self. This can be a rather off-putting topic, particularly to the ego. Wilber indicates that it's one of the natural stages we have already experienced and will continue to experience should we continue to grow. Let me see here. Zilda, are you available for reading number 10?
Okay. In order to advance to a higher stage of development, you need to die to the worldview of the previous one. At the early stages, this happens more or less automatically. But the more conscious you become, the more frightening it is to let go of what you've already got, your sense of self, however inadequate or limited it may be. We don't have many pacers, people who have developed beyond stage 5 or so, and there is no collective magnet to help pull us above that level.
Okay, thank you. The practical challenge for most people is not so much to transcend their boundaries as to make them more permeable. I'm
Mark,
hope.
sorry, do you see?
Oh,
that?
I see.
Or-
Sorry, I'm not looking up at my screen all the time. Ingrid, yes, please go ahead.
Sorry, my phone was just ringing and I'm ignoring it. That notion of there is no collective magnet, I don't know, I just can't help but feel that the manifestations of God might be these collective magnets that can help pull us into higher and higher levels.
I would agree with that, but I'm thinking when he uses the word collective, he's thinking of a whole group of human beings, regular human beings who have gone through the process that we are going through. Whereas a manifestation of God is a little bit different than a regular human being because of their divine capacities. So, but they do serve that purpose of drawing us forward into evolution. There's no question about it. Yeah. Okay. Let me see here. So I was going to ask Hangame if she would read number 11 followed by 12 in a second.
For sure. The question is not just what floor of the building you're living on, but how many floors you have ready access to as you negotiate your way through life.
Mm-hmm. Do you have the run of the building, or are you stuck in the basement? Stages do not replace or negate earlier ones. They transcend and include them. And that's number 12.
The higher stage always has access to those below it. Each succeeding level has all the capacities of the previous level, and then it adds something extra. That something extra is what makes it transcending in relation to the previous one. What's negated is not the previous stage, but its limitations. Each stage transcends and includes.
Okay, so this is, thank you. That's the basic dynamic force going on in every one of our own evolutionary paths. And everybody on this call and all those that we know. Okay, so let's look at this cover. This is a famous book that Wilber wrote, released in or published in 1995, 800 and some pages long. A real challenge to read. Following the death of Treya in 1989, Wilber was overcome by pent-up demand to pursue his calling. You remember, he had not written anything for 5 years, hadn't been able to meditate. Therefore, he eagerly picked up where his earlier writings had left off. His initial plan was to finish writing a textbook on psychology that he tentatively called System, Self, and Structure. As he began revising his notes, he realized that 4 of the words he had used in the first paragraph were no longer allowed in academic discourse. These were development, hierarchy, transcendental, and universal. This put such a cramp in his style that he shelved the book once again. It would be 10 more years before he published an abridged version of its contents under the title Integral Psychology. Mary, how are you feeling about reading tonight?
Please, thank you. But can I pass it tonight?
No
I'm
problem.
not that much feeling.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Okay. How about David Oak then? Could you read number 13 for us?
Sure, gladly do that for you.
Thank you.
Reading 13, what had happened in my 10-year writing hiatus, and to which I had paid insufficient attention, is that extreme postmodernism had rather completely invaded academia in general and cultural studies in particular. Even the alternative colleges and institutes were speaking postmodernese with an authoritarian thunder. The politically correct were policing the types of serious discourse that could and could not be uttered in academe. Pluralistic relativism was the only acceptable worldview. Ken Wilber, Sex, Ecology, Spirituality, preface to the 2nd edition.
Okay, and if you just hang on, David, I'll ask you to read the next one in a second. So this
Sure.
was, remember, she died in 89, so this is the early part of the 90s when he's talking about extreme postmodernism in academic studies. So what does he mean by this term pluralistic relativism that you saw here? What does that mean? So here's the explanation according to David, number 14.
Sorry, David, I had to mute you because there was background noise.
And
There we go.
Okay. Oh,
okay, it claimed that all truth is culturally situated, except its own truth, which is true for all cultures. It claimed that there are no transcendental truths, except its own pronouncements, which transcend specific contexts. It claimed that all hierarchies or value rankings are oppressive and marginalizing, except its own value ranking, which is superior to the alternatives. It claimed that there are no universal truths except its own pluralism, which is universally true for all peoples. And I don't know what he's talking about.
so what he's doing is he's skewering the postmodernists for their two-edged sword. They're making all these claims about truth being culturally situated, but they're then saying that their truth that they're talking about isn't culturally situated. It's true for all cultures. Well, which one is it? And then the same with all the others that he's listing here. There are no transcendental truths except for their own statements, which transcend all the specific contexts. So they're trying to eat their cake and have it too, right? They don't They don't realize that they're falling into this particular problem. There are no universal truths except for pluralism, which is universally true for all people. Well, is it a universal truth or not? Do you see the logical problem here? It's a fallacy. So Wilber is identifying most of the downsides of extreme postmodernism and pluralistic relativism in this quote. He recognizes that there are a number of positive benefits which also deserve a hearing. So these include, and here's our little list, the benefits of postmodernism. Constructivism, which is the notion that all truths are context dependent. So because I grew up in Ottawa and I've been a Canadian all my life, a lot of what I think is Canadian, whether I'm aware of it or not. Okay, so integral perspectivism. They came up with the idea that no context is finely privileged. So somebody living in South Africa, for instance, has a totally different perspective on the world than somebody in Canada. But usually in ways that are too subtle for them to pick out, unless they go to Canada and start to see what Canadians believe, how they talk, etc. Then they start to get a notion of what those differences are. So the integral view that Wilber is proposing will include all these multiple perspectives. It won't say this one is better than that one. And it's also a belief in pluralism, which we've spoken about before when we were talking about how people regard people of other faiths. Remember that they start with the idea that their own religion is the best and all the rest are completely wrong. And then gradually they become more inclusive in their thinking. And if they spend time on the subject, they may get to the point where they're aware of many of the different religions and accept that they are all true in some way. So that's pluralism. And postmodernism is also the birthplace of multiculturalism. So each of the cultures in the world has value. And it's of benefit to everyone to introduce themselves to those different cultures. Okay. Postmodernism at its best is an elucidation of the profound importance of these truths. It is not, however, the highest wave of development. When it matures into its middle and late phases, pluralistic relativism gives way to a more holistic mode of awareness, which begins to weave the pluralistic voices into beautiful tapestries of integral content. So in other words, pluralistic relativism gives way to universal integralism, which is what the Baha'i Faith is aiming for, where pluralism frees the many different voices and multiple contexts. Universal integralism begins to bring them together into a harmonized chorus. Okay. Marie, would you consider reading number 15 for me?
Certainly.
Thank you.
One thing was very clear, excuse me. One thing was very clear to me as I struggled with how best to proceed in an intellectual climate dedicated to deconstructing anything that crossed its path. I would have to back up and start at the beginning and try to create a vocabulary for a more constructive philosophy. Beyond pluralistic relativism is universal integralism. I therefore sought to outline a philosophy of universal integralism. Ken Wilber, Sex, Ecology, Spirituality.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So in other words, Wilber was seeking to create a world or integral philosophy. This would believably weave together the many pluralistic contexts of science, morals, aesthetics, Eastern as well as Western philosophy, as well as the world's great wisdom traditions. Given the scope, he couldn't approach such a task on the level of details. He decided to adopt a level of what he refers to as orienting generalizations. Yeah, reading ahead too fast. So these are truths that are accepted by most of those within their own fields. Using this strategy, he aimed to delineate a world that is truly one undivided whole and related to itself in every way. What he's describing is a holistic philosophy for a holistic cosmos, with K for cosmos. It took him 3 years, but sex ecology spirituality was the result. During that time, Wilber lived as a hermit. He says he saw exactly 4 people in 3 years. It is very much a typical 3-year silent retreat from Buddhism. The hardest part for him were the hierarchies he was struggling to synthesize. There were the easy ones, as he calls them, in the natural sciences, since everybody agreed with them. Atoms to molecules to cells to organisms, for example. You can see them in a microscope. This kind of hierarchy is one of actual embrace. Cells literally embrace or enfold molecules. Slightly more difficult hierarchies were those discovered by developmental psychologists. These all told variations on the cognitive hierarchy that goes from sensation to perception, to impulse, to image, to symbol, to concept, to rule. Although the names varied and the schemes were slightly different, the hierarchical story was very much the same. Each succeeding stage incorporated its predecessors and then added some new capacity. There's that transcend and include thing again. In these hierarchies, however, the members were not visible to the naked eye as they were with the natural scientists. You simply can't see interior states of consciousness in the same way. Okie dokie, let's see. I see that Jennifer is online. Maybe you could read 16 for us.
And those were the easy ones. There were linguistic hierarchies, contextual hierarchies, spiritual hierarchies. There were stages of development and phonetics, stellar systems, cultural worldviews, autopoietic systems, technological modes, economic structures, phylogenetic unfoldings, superconscious realizations, and they simply refuse to agree with each other.
So if you just want to hang on, maybe you can do the next one too.
Okay.
Wilber was tenacious enough to hold this problem firmly in mind until it finally yielded to him. The whole thing eventually started to become clear to him. Okay, so this is number 17, Jennifer.
Not maybe as clear to the rest of us, so
Wow.
as it was to him.
You got to work with the problem now.
Yeah. It soon became obvious that the various hierarchies fall into 4 major classes, what I would eventually call the 4 quadrants. That some of the hierarchies are referring to individuals, some to collectives, some are about exterior realities, some are about interior ones, but they all fit together seamlessly. The ingredients of these hierarchies are holons, wholes that are parts of other wholes. For example, a whole atom is part of a whole molecule, which is part of a whole cell, which is part of a whole organism, and so on. And therefore, the correct word for hierarchy is actually holarchy. The cosmos is a series of nests within nests within nests indefinitely, expressing greater and greater holistic embrace.
holarchies of holons everywhere, which is why everybody had their own value hierarchy, and why, in the end, all of these holarchies intermesh and fit perfectly with all the others.
Okay, thank you. That was well read. So the reason I've gone into such detail about the process of writing this 800-page book is that it is truly Wilber's magnum opus. All the many books which he subsequently wrote, with the exception of The Religion of Tomorrow, the big new one, all repeat significant portions of this work. It forms the bedrock of his synthesis. Frankly, I suspect that his 3-year struggle to integrate over 200 charts relating to development will be his most lasting legacy. The framework he designed as a result may well be modified in terms of its detail in the future, but the underlying structure is likely to survive. So at this point, the biographical information available to me relating to Wilber kind of dries up. I don't know what he's really been doing since the year 95. But I've attached, or I've sent out a full bibliography that I distributed the other day. Here it is. As you can, I've broken them up into periods, and he is the one who came up with the Wilber 1, Wilber 2, Wilber 3 designations. And up to this stage of the interlude with Treya, I'm pretty confident. But once we get into Wilber 4, I'm not sure if there's a break at some point in these many, many items earlier than what I've listed as Wilber number 5, possibly. I've never seen anybody specifically nail down what Wilber 5 covers. So for the sake of continuing the pattern, I just thought I'd start here in 2017. Anyway, so that's, I'm going to take a breather right now.
Mark, Jack.
I see Jack has got his hand up, so that's perfect timing, Jack. What would you like to say?
Okay, well, I'm glad Wilber had his epiphany about how all of this fits together, but according to mathematical systems, they don't. For example, Euclidean and non-Euclidean geometry are incompatible. They only work based on the premises that you use. For example, in Euclidean geometry, parallel lines never meet, but in non-Euclidean geometry, they can meet. So I don't know if it's as neat as what he's suggesting there, because as I know very little about math and very little about geometry, but I understand the concept that those two systems of geometry are incompatible. They only work logically within their own system. So I'm not sure things all fit as nicely as Wilber is suggesting there. Based on that one example, that, you know, I can't really generalize from that because he's done a big system study, but on the surface, Euclidean and non-Euclidean, sorry, geometry wouldn't seem to fit there. Now, if anybody knows more about this than I do, let me know.
Well, can I just say before they do, Jack, my sense is that how he would address that is that we're talking about two different contexts within mathematics. The environment that each of those two systems was developed in was unique to themselves.
Right.
Just as in physics today, for instance, the physics is a very small, obeys rules which are completely different than the physics of the very large. And scientists are struggling like crazy trying to get them to mesh together into a single grand unified theory, as they call it, a gut. And they haven't been able to do it yet. as far as I know, unless something's happened recently. So, but he doesn't get too hung up on that. And he's using postmodernism and its views of all these different contexts as his get out of jail free card. It doesn't have to be a single theory, if you like, that washes away all the distinctions between theories. What he's doing is proposing a meta theory which incorporates the right of all theories to exist in their own truth, in their own context.
Well, then that's contextualization. If that's the case, they don't all fit together perfectly, as he seemed to be claiming there. They would work only within their own context then, following from what you're saying.
Well, I'm not sure whether I've defined his goals well enough yet. It may be that you're thinking he's unifying things beyond what I'm thinking he's trying to do. I'm going to talk a little bit more a little later tonight about his ultimate goals.
Okay, because the way the quote, I read the quote, it sounded like he was saying he had the master key that harmonized all the systems. And that's a very, very big claim.
What he's done is he's created an overarching structure where he can place all of these different theories in one of the quadrants. And even
I
within
see.
the quadrants themselves, there will be disputations going on.
Okay, that's different. Okay.
And one of the reasons for that, Jack, is that people are evolving their theories as they evolve as human beings, as their perspectives become more all-embracing. They think differently than they did when they had a smaller perspective, if you like.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes more sense. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for the clarification.
Anybody else? Oh, there's Harold. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think to call it a meta theory is interesting. But see, that sounds like it's making a claim about all of metaphysical reality. I think he's mainly, I don't have the right word for it. He's a systematic thinker. He's trying to find a place for all hierarchies. He's trying to find a place for them.
Yep.
And a respectful place, you know, so that I admire. I mean, he's being a diplomat between different, you know, fields and different thought systems and such. So I totally admire that. I don't see him making an absolute claim that this is the last metaphysical system anyone will ever need.
No,
he's not doing that. But I think he's sort of giving us a way to locate in intellectual space or spiritual space or consciousness space any scheme that anyone has for development or hierarchy. He's trying to give it a place. He's saying it's either individual or collective or interior or exterior. He thinks those four categories help locate, you know, any new system of thought. I still always, I can't help but, you know, as a Baha'i, wonder what would he do with progressive revelation? What would he do with that as a developmental theory of religion across the ages? I'd like to see where he sticks that.
He would be very comfortable with it.
Okay.
As we'll see as we go forward.
He might call it an integral, a universal integralism, a type of universal integralism. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Bill, what's up?
Well, I was just thinking what Jack was saying, and we're talking about context and how what's presented is true within a particular context. And, you know, and in this day and age, we have, you know, I've seen a lot of bridging between context, right, with the use of equivalence. So like, for example, if I tell someone a heat pump has 300% efficiency, They're like, no, 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 no. Entropy means you can only have 100% efficiency. So when we say a heat pump is 300% efficiency, it's actually equivalent because heat is created when you like do a furnace or something like that. And when you use a heat pump, you're moving it around, and the energy required to move that heat around is 1/3 the amount required to heat it, to create it.
I see.
So we have two totally different contexts here, and we as human beings are trying to understand or forming our understanding around how we operate within those contexts, or how we have the ability to bridge. With electric cars, you say they have this thing called MPGE, like for example, a Tesla Model Y is 120 MPGE, which is miles per gallon equivalents. So we're taking this really soon to be archaic concept of miles per gallon to help us understand how much energy we are taking advantage of in how efficiently, and we're taking it to a whole nother realm, and we're having to bridge that gap with equivalence. So I think when you look at what Wilber is saying in terms of how these things contain each other, they not only to me contain each other, but there's an organic growth with with how human beings understand something that is gradually overcome by a new container.
Nice.
That better that gives a clearer, better understanding that encompasses both concepts, because you could say MPGE is equivalent to miles per gallon, but you could also say miles per gallon is equivalent to MPGE. It's just a matter of nomenclature.
Now, one of the things that distinguishes these levels as you move up is that the complexity increases. So listening to you, I understand that now. Whoa, you just about lost me there, Bill. Just about. But I get the point. I think you're quite right. The new container is contains more stuff.
Yeah.
That's all there is, really.
And they don't reject each other is the point. They do contain each other.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that is a building block of Wilber's is that no theory is 100% right. They're all partly right. And so the rubbing up against each other tends to get rid of some of those things which are defects in those systems, so that they become more and more right over time. And the collection of them in a bigger container holds that rightness together. Okay, David Andrews, I see only your forehead, so maybe you could adjust your count. There he is. Okay.
Sorry, guys. I'm not doing well today. The COVID's kind of
you got it
out for the last 5 days, but I am recovering.
God.
But I just want to, here, let me show you this. Maybe that'll help. I don't know if you can see it or not. There's
oh yeah, it's a cone, and then looking down on top of the cone.
Okay, so let's
Or a
say the
pyramid.
cone is the hierarchy or representation of hierarchy.
Nice, sure, okay.
And those concentric circles are a representation of a holon. Okay. Right. So it's interesting to me that the Baha'i temple is more like a holon. Okay. It's circular, energy flows in and out from all directions. And so, when we sit in an assembly meeting, we sit in a circle. So if you think of us moving away from hierarchical models and hierarchical systems and the authoritarianism of hierarchical structures, and moving into holonistic structures, I'm not sure if I'm getting the language right here, but with holons are a much, I guess to me, when I started to learn about holons, I thought this was the most radical concept in just understanding reality that I've seen. if you look at a galaxy, it's an example of a holon. You look at a beehive, it's an example of a holon. If you look at millions of things in biology and nature, nature evolves, holonistically, right? It's just circles within circles within circles, and that's how the patterns are created, and there are spirals. And so when I look at physical reality through this lens, the physical reality makes so much more sense. And so if I look at the spiritual reality through that same lens, it's much more inclusive, right? It's not this faith and then that one and then another one. But if you put God in the middle of the holon, then all of those traditions flow around that one circle, and there will be more and more and more in the future. It's like in Buddhism, when you throw the pebble in the water, right?
Yeah.
That's the creation of a holon. That those waves go out in all directions for a long, long, long time. So that's what a holon is. Okay. The outer contains the inner, and the patterns and structures are exactly the same. And one begets the other. So anyway, that's all. Just maybe that'll shed a little light or help people understand it a little better.
Oh, that was terrific. Thank you very much, David.
Okay.
You've obviously spent some time on this.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah, it's very good. Like, it's so advanced in the way that it conceptualizes not just material reality, but social reality and spiritual reality, And when you approach it through the holistic paradigm, the holonistic paradigm, the relationships between the parts and pieces, it transcends. Obviously, it's elevated, but it's much more in keeping with the Baha'i teaching than a hierarchical model is.
Yeah. Now I have to say that I think the adjective is holonic.
Holonic, okay, yeah.
It's easier to say too. Okay, Jack, what are you saying?
Go ahead.
Oh,
Forgot to unmute. Yeah, I'm always, we do these comparisons as we hear these statements from different speakers. At least I'm always comparing and trying to work it out with the faith, how it fits or how it may not fit, how it correlates, it may not correlate. About hierarchy, the Guardian said that the Baha'i faith was definitely hierarchical, and that we should not apologize for that. The Universal House of Justice is at the head of the pyramid. It's not on the same level as the LSA. So there is a hierarchy built in, even though. So where do the circles and the holons, David has referred to the temple. How does the circle of unity fit in with the hierarchical structure, which you would think is more of a pyramid? Now, it's interesting that in the handwriting of the Bab himself, you will recall that he put a square inside a circle.
Yep.
Have any of you seen any of those diagrams that the Bab did?
Yep.
Which are kind of spiritual exercises. So I guess in some ways you can square the circle if you put it inside a circle. I don't know. I just these are just comments that are running through my mind as
well,
liberally, the faith is very liberal in its, pluralistic teachings of unity in world religions and all of that sort of thing. You might say it's very, very liberal, but in its moral code, it's very, very conservative and quite strict. So anyway,
well,
just a few thoughts.
What how I want to respond to that, Jack, is by talking about the distinction between healthy hierarchies and dominator hierarchies. It's the dominator hierarchies which have given the whole idea of hierarchy a bad name. But
Ah.
people have to remember that, or to realize that there are actually such things as healthy hierarchies, which I would place the Baha'i faith in. Right?
Oh, good point.
So, and with the Universal House of Justice, they have the care and well-being of the entire planet on their plate, on their agenda. Whereas a local spiritual assembly is looking at a much more tightly focused city or part of a city, right? So the extent of their concern is significantly less. So just in terms of geography, you'd have to say that the Universal House of Justice has a priority in terms of the embrace of its mandate.
Right. And the spiral would work here too, wouldn't it, Mark? If you think of an ever widening spiral going out,
that's right.
The House of Justice has more within its compass, and you know, Wilber's Transcend and include also works for the Baha'i hierarchy, because the House of Justice has all the qualities of the lower institutions.
That's right.
But then transcends them at the same time.
That's it.
So it includes them.
Yeah.
So that principle also works. And I think a lot of, you know, I've discovered in my research that a lot of spiritual principles can be summarized in terms of geometric, like oscillating figures or spiral figures, or there seems to be a very compact way of seems to be a correlation between geometric figures and certain spiritual truths, you know?
Yeah, I think you're quite right. Okay, Harold, what's your thinking at the moment?
I was just going to say that even though the Baha'i faith is a hierarchy, it's a highly receptive hierarchy. In other words, information and ideas and excitement can flows upward from the ground to the House of Justice. And I think the fact that we have the two arms, the decision-making arm and the learned arm, and but anyway, a lot of feedback comes to the ITC and the Universal House of Justice from the grassroots, and it intentionally seeks such feedback. That's what keeps it from being an oppressive hierarchy, I think, that it has its ear to the ground, so to speak.
That's true. It's both top down and bottom up, isn't it?
In a way, yeah.
And the other thing that's really promoting all of that is the principle of humility, right? Both are at all levels of the hierarchy. We have people attempting to be as humble as possible. Okay, Bill, and then Joey.
Yeah, I would say that hierarchy in the way that we're talking is really just a means to help us better understand the nature of things, and that they're not mutually exclusive. That one can, like for example, the core of the Earth is molten, and without that molten core, people, physicists or astronomers believe that you wouldn't have life. It's the basis. It's one of the important things of life. So it's at the center. It is encompassed. It is contained by the planet, and yet, from a hierarchical perspective, you could say that's the first requirement in order to be able to generate what we call a planet that has life. And so you can take that all the way to the other containers until you get into the atmosphere and all the layers of Earth, and they're all containers that you could look at as a hierarchy. If what you're trying to understand is how does this relate to, for example, life and the generation of it and the possibility of it. So the same with the Universal House of Justice versus the local spiritual assembly. They're all part of this one entity, this one planet of spirituality, and there's and we can look at the core of it which I would call the universal house of justice, and what emanates therefrom to the local community, which is not, and then the next thing from the assembly, the local Baha'i community, that's the atmosphere. So you have both both concepts of containing and hierarchy. There's no difference really, except in our minds.
And then as you were talking, I couldn't help thinking that exactly the same kind of analogy that you're drawing there could be used with the solar system.
Exactly.
With the sun at the center, which is pumping out that life-giving heat and light. Anyway, I don't want to dwell on it, but yeah, you're raising a very good point. Okay, Joey.
I was just thinking visually for me, if you look at a triangle as the hierarchy with the universal house of justice at the top, and if that's a three-dimensional triangle and you flip it on its back, what you see is the universal house of justice at the center versus at the top. So there's two sort of different perspectives of how you look at the structure within the faith.
Yeah, we're quite limited by our own mental concepts. So David was the one who had this idea of showing us the top view of that hierarchy. And I think you've just picked up on the same thing. That's yet another way of visualizing that one word, hierarchy. There may be others that we haven't even considered.
Quite an insight, Joey. Thank you. I never thought of a pyramid that way.
Okay, Robert, what are you thinking?
Well, I think the closest analogy is, in ecology. I mean, the ecosphere of the whole planet, and then you have ecosystems and bioregions and local sites and so on. There's a nested hierarchy, and I see that very much parallel to the way local and national and the House of Justice operate.
One of the things I thought of doing, I decided against it because it's a little bit difficult to scan pages of a book, but I believe it's in Integral Psychology, one of the books that Wilber wrote, he shows all these hierarchies side by side, about 100 or so of them. And seeing those, I think, really sheds the same kind of light we're trying to gain tonight. You could see what he's talking about, what he struggled with for those 2 or 3 years, trying to align them up so that they fit in some big theory. I'm just in awe of his capacity to do that, frankly. When you see the level of detail and complicated terminology that a lot of these developmental theories have come up with, it's quite staggering to see what he's achieved. Okay, I guess we've exhausted that topic. I can see that we're not going to finish my talk tonight, but I think I'll push on and see how far I can go, if you don't mind. So I wanted to talk about Wilber's view of religion. So starting near the beginning of the new millennium, 2000, Wilber began to create integral institutes with the help of dozens of scholars in more than 20 academic fields. They continue to this day, applying his framework, if you like, his AQUIL structure to their specific areas of concern. So I thought I'd give you a couple of examples of this growing collaborative effort. In 2011, Sean Esborn Hargens and Michael Zimmerman published a book called Integral Ecology. It's another 800-page tome which itemizes dozens of real-life applications and examples of Wilber's integral framework currently in use. These include 3 in-depth case studies. The first is a work with marine fisheries in Hawaii. The second are strategies of eco-activists to protect Canada's Great Bear Rainforest. And the third is a study of community development in El Salvador. In addition, 18 personal practices of transformation are provided to increase people's own integral ecological awareness. So more recently, one of Wilber's students, Dustin DePerna, has been spearheading the growth of the Integral Religious Studies Institute. To this date, he has published 4 volumes, 2 of his own, one called Streams of Wisdom in 2014, and Evolution's Ally in 2015. And then 2 collaborative volumes, one called The Coming Waves and Earth is Eden. So I've read 3 of these so far and have found that they make absolutely fascinating reading. Their amplification and deepening of Wilber's book called Integral Spirituality may well serve as the basis for a future course. So let's look at Wilber's principles. I just mentioned one of them a few minutes ago. Well, 2 of them. We've already mentioned transcend and include. So here are 5 others. No one is capable of 100% error. Wilber evaluates the individual strengths, myths, pretensions, shortcomings, and outright falsehoods contained in any given approach to wisdom. I think Abdu'l-Baha would have loved him for his poking fun at superstition in all its forms. He has an integral approach. The stated aim of the truly integral approach is that everyone is right. And thus there is a demand to include every known form of experience and potential into vistas broad enough and compassionate enough to make room for all. The trick, of course, would be to find a way to genuinely integrate, or at least make room for, both the insights of the great contemplative traditions and the undeniable truths of modern scientific research. His is an interdisciplinary approach. These grand visions are fully anchored in the very best of modern scientific research, but they do not stop there. They point even further into the heart and soul and spirit of a radiant universe, a universe that in the deepest sense is part and parcel of your very own nature, the discovery of which is surely the supreme adventure. He also uses something he calls integral mapping. In the 21st century, we have the chance to create maps, models, and practices that embrace the entire sweep of human possibilities. Not merely to think about this vast potential, but ways to actualize it, to realize it, to live it, and breathe it as part of our own extraordinary birthright, even here and now. And the 5th principle is the map is not the territory. 2 important characteristics of maps should be noticed. The map is not the territory it represents, but if correct, it has a similar structure to the territory, which accounts for its usefulness. If we reflect upon our languages, we find at best they must be considered only as maps. A word is not the object it represents. That's from Mujan Momen in The Phenomenon of Religion. Okay, where's our time like? Okay, I just want to see if I should stop here or whether we could continue.
Mark, Alan's hand is up.
Oh, I see. Okay, Alan, what's up?
Yeah, I think that the map is not the territory. It's a very important concept. One of the things that I've come to understand is that how I see the world is not how the world is. That we build these mental models inside our brains, you know, the skull case, and what we produce inside our brain is not the reality that's out there. It's something that we have created, whether we're talking about a table or a chair or a house or a person. what we have inside our heads as these mental models is as close at an approximation as we put the time in order to create it. But but it's not the reality. And so many of us feel that we walk around and we understand these mental models as reality, but it's not. It's very much like Wilber is saying, the map is not the territory. It's not the reality. It's a piece of paper.
That's very Buddhist, Alan. Have you been reading up on that?
I would say spoken like a true mystic.
Yes.
Which of course Alan is.
Well, he won't admit it, but he is. Any other comments or thoughts at this point? Or should I motor on?
One thing I wanted to say about system building, Mark. God is going to get us in the end because God is the unknowable. And I was reading Baha'u'llah the other day, and he was talking about the origins of the universe. And basically, to roughly paraphrase Baha'u'llah, he said, it doesn't matter how far men of science go to explain the origins of the universe, they will never get to the bottom of it. In other words, God is God, and there will always be mystery. Mystery is built in to creation. Science solves one problem, and in solving one problem, it opens up another problem. We had Newtonian physics, and then we had particle physics, and how do they fit together? They don't fit together very well. So what I'm saying is I think that we have to retain also, as great as these minds are, Wilber's mind or anybody else's great mind over the centuries, we have to retain a certain humility. I think this is what Baha'u'llah is telling us about. There are certain things which are impenetrable to the human intellect. And it will always be like that because God is God, and he designed the universe. And if we ever get to the point where we understand it all, then we will have understood the mind of God, and we can't do that. But this is precisely what Stephen Hawking said they were going to do. He said, once we figure out the gut, the grand unified theory, electromagnetic, and the strong force, the weak force, the gravitational, I even forget what they are. He said, we will have figured out the mind of God then, he said.
As he conceives him. That's what the problem is. He's got a limited view of who God is.
Yeah, as he conceives him, exactly. And he ended up by saying he didn't believe in God, but anyway.
Well, if he could wrap his head around it, it wouldn't be worth being a God, eh? If you could see the limitations of it, it isn't God. That's one of well, you were talking about the mysteries of God. One of the things that sort of stops me in my tracks is thinking about the names of God, particularly two of them, the manifest and the unmanifest. And here we are so busy working on the manifest, we have no clue whatsoever about the unmanifest. And you were talking about the limitations of human intellectual powers. What about the limits imposed on the manifestations of God? They do not understand God either. And they're significantly further along the path than we are. So if anything should be stopping us in our tracks, that, I think, is it.
Yeah, thou shalt never behold me.
That's one of the reasons I chose that video at the beginning of the course. Looking at that little speck of dust in the rings of Saturn. We've got to keep that humility. Well, friends, I'm thinking I shouldn't start this next little section. I got about halfway through, a little more than halfway through my talk tonight. I'm just going to bring it forward to the next time we're together. But we're not meeting next week because of the Baha'i calendar. So we will meet in 2 weeks' time. I'll send a reminder of that fact on Sunday, just so nobody comes on and wonders where everybody is. So, unless anybody's got any further questions or points, oh, Lori has something she'd like to say. She needs, there she is.
I'm just wondering, Mark, is it okay then that we have the discussion in the class and you don't complete what you had set out? How do you feel about that?
I'm fine with it. Because it's in the discussion where you start to actually play with the ideas that I'm laying out. Otherwise, it's just lying there dead on the surface of the computer screen. And it's not going in.
Yeah, I find the discussions help me understand a little bit more.
No, I value them. I think that's the whole point, is to end up having a discussion about your own perceptions of what we're talking about. So, but it does kind of skew my schedule a little bit, but that's all right. We'll figure it out.
Thank you.
Well, what do you say, folks? Is that it for tonight? Everybody overwhelmed and tired?
So Mark, there is no session next Wednesday or the 23rd or the 30th?
No, we'll come back on the 30th.
Yeah.
So the 23rd is spoken for. So, oh, Harold, yes, sir.
You know, before we were talking about holons and maybe we were getting a headache, but I remember something that helped me understand holons. It was that you could, you know, if you think of a letter is part of a word. And a word is part of a phrase, and a phrase is part of a sentence, and a sentence is part of a paragraph, and a paragraph is part of a chapter, and a chapter is part of a book, and a book is in a field of knowledge. And you could keep going and say, you know, all the words that describe reality would be one thing, and then all the things that could be said that aren't said, it'd be even bigger. So I think that's kind of how, you know, Wilber is thinking. I mean, those are steps you can visualize.
That's right.
From a word to, you know, starting from a letter all the way up, because we think in words and we use words and we understand how each one, you know, has meaning in itself, but it's part of a larger package of meaning. Right. So that helped me understand his metaphysics, that each thing transcends and includes what came before.
Yeah.
So a paragraph transcends and includes what sentences are and what letters are.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he does say exactly that. You're quite right. Okay, David Oak. Oh, you're on mute.
There we go.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, as you were talking about, let's say, the immensity of both the physical and the spiritual universe, and the need for humility. On the other hand, there's a counterbalance that we have to have the brass to try. That an essential part of both science and religion is to push the envelope. And if we're not doing that, we're not living. And like, that's an essential part of religion. We'll never understand God, but we have to try.
Yeah.
And
that's, sorry,
I'm
go
just
ahead.
saying, like last night, this rocket that is going around the moon, as a precursor to going to Mars was sent off, compared to the universe that's very humble. But that's where we are right now.
Mhm.
And that, you know, for the rest of humanity, that envelope will be expanded in some ways. That's sort of a counterbalance. You can't be so humble that we don't try, that we're not active, we're not pushing.
You're quite right to counterbalance this. We could take it to the extreme and not do anything. That's quite right.
Yeah.
So I think one of the attributes that each of us has been given is yearning.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever we're yearning for draws us on, asks for the best that we have to offer, pushes us to go beyond the boundaries that we've lived under for a long time. And it's there all the time. It never stops.
Yeah. If I was to put your course into one word, I think the one word would be yearning.
I don't know how to take that.
Is it? Well,
no, I do understand what you mean.
Yeah,
it is. It's my form of yearning for greater knowledge of God and the systems that he's created, that he's given to us.
Yeah. Anyway, that's sort of my little bit.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, Joey, what are you thinking?
I was just thinking often when I look at the readings beforehand, I'm connecting the reading to what I understand in the faith.
Mhm.
And I was reading about holons and I thought, oh, an expanding nuclei. Because I was seeing the nest within the nest within the nest, and it
Mhm.
all of a sudden made sense of that in a much more visual way for me. Okay, I know what they're talking about now.
So the nuclei being, talk more about what you meant by that.
Well, in the framework for action, they talk about an expanding nuclei that begins with a center team.
Gotcha.
That expands out, bringing new people into the team, and therefore the team grows and expands even larger, and you bring more people into the center with their knowledge, and it keeps growing in that fashion. And I was looking at the idea of holons and nest within a nest within a nest, and everything becoming larger, or a word within a sentence within a paragraph. The visual is one thing that is becoming larger and larger with the inclusion of the same energy. So if you're including a word within a paragraph, you have more words. If you're including individuals within a team, you get a larger group of people. And that was the sort of theory behind an expanding nuclei that was put forward in a framework for action. So that's the parallel I saw.
Well, I see it now, what you're saying. But one thing we have to consider, though, is whether or not we're just expanding on a horizontal line, or whether there's some point where that increase in the number of individuals will lead to new insights that are a vertical step up from what everyone was thinking of when they began as a member of that team.
Well, hopefully that was the intent, that it wasn't just a linear gain of knowledge.
Right.
That was my understanding, that it wasn't meant to be linear.
Okay. Well,
But
it starts that way, but yeah. Okay, fair enough. Okay, Jack.
Well, Mark, you've generated an interesting discussion as always. The truth of poetry, there's sort of a poetic quality I've noticed to some of Wilber's writing. There's a kind of a poetry about it, and I just wanted to read a few lines of the great Lord Tennyson, who foresaw the future federation of the world, by the way, in his poetry. and it relates to what we're discussing, or one of the themes that we talked about. Flower in the crannied wall. I pluck you out of the crannies. I hold you here, root and all, in my hand. Little flower. But if I could understand what you are, root and all in all, I should know what God and man is. So in other words, this most delicate of things, completely escapes our intellectual understanding and contains, once again, another great mystery. And I agree with David. Yes, we have to be intellectually ambitious. And, David, what I admire are the mathematicians, for example, who work for years on problems and theories, and they just amazingly, they work them out eventually, that kind of, we need that kind of ambition and that kind of stick-to-itiveness to understand. Religion was used in the past, as Mark said, as the opiate of the people, Don't ask too many questions. You might get kicked out of Canon Cody's confirmation class, as one lady I know was, because she asked too many questions. Canon Cody didn't like all of her questions, so he kicked her out of the class. So anyway, that's just a thought from Tennyson. And about challenging concepts, I spoke about hierarchy. Another very challenging concept that the world is not ready for right now, because of the Islamic Republic, is that the Baha'i faith is a theocracy. This is a very loaded word today, and a very scary one for a lot of people because of what it has come to represent. But the Shoghi Effendi did say, yes, that the Baha'i faith is a theocracy because it's based on divine revelation and divine institutions that derive from the founder. But, the world is not ready for that concept yet. It's ruled by God, and but because of this, the scariness that what that concept suggests to a lot of people when clerics run a country, and of course there are no clergy in the Baha'i faith, we have a completely different system. That might be also one to use with caution when we're teaching non-Baha'is. Not everything that we know should necessarily be shared, or shared perhaps to those who are ready for it. Anyway, that's all I want to say. Thank you, Mark.
Okay. Well, Alan, I think I'm going to give the last word to you.
This is the first word.
Oh, no.
I was just building on what Harold said about how we'd start off when he was moving through letters and books. I had heard recently that there is this term called point of bayan. I'm sure that you'll know about it, Mark, and Jack will, more erudite individuals. And the explanation that was given to me was, yeah, in Islam, when you are writing, the smallest thing that you can write is at the point. And everything expands and changes and grows from that single point.
Yep.
And so if you consider then the manifestation is the point, and that sort of fits within this concept of concentric rings. It also fits in within the cone with the levels and divisions. And I just thought that was a sort of a neat way of drawing these things together.
Yeah, that's sort of the previous step in that holarchy that we described earlier, of the letter to the word to the sentence. Yeah, it all starts with the point under the B, which is the first letter of the Quran. Yeah. So that's true in both the Baha'i faith and Islam. Well, folks,
Yeah.
I think that's probably all we need to talk about tonight. What do you
And
think?
the B is the first letter also in Genesis, Bereshit.
That's right. You gotta wonder, why is there a B? No A's, just B's. Oh, we've got two more comments. Okay, sorry. Okay, Alan again, and then Wendy. Oh, you haven't taken yours down yet.
Kim Smiley had her hand.
Oh, did she? Okay. And all right, Wendy James, and then Kim.
Well, just very quickly, isn't it one of the Bob's title, the primal point?
Absolutely. Yes, it is. And Kim, is Kim still
I
there?
think Kim might have been just saying goodbye and good night. and
Oh,
goodbye.
maybe that's what she was doing. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to say goodnight. So thank you all. This was wonderful. I enjoyed it very thoroughly. I hope you did too.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
So we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Enjoy the winter.
Yeah.
Bye.
We don't have any choice.
Thank you, Linda.